Form 2553 is the IRS form that elects S-Corp tax treatment for an eligible entity, and it has 3 deadline windows that determine whether the election takes effect for the year you wanted or has to wait. Missing a window doesn't void the election forever. It pushes the election out to the following tax year, with one limited relief path for late filings under specific conditions. This video walks the 3 windows, what each one covers, and the late relief path so the timing question gets settled before you assume an election is in place that actually isn't. 3 windows, hard edges, that's the structure to keep in mind across this video. Form 2553 has 3 distinct timing paths, and each one applies to a different starting situation. Miss them all, and you cannot elect for the current tax year. The election pushes to the next year. The windows aren't suggestions. The IRS treats them as bright-line dates with specific consequences for being on the wrong side. Knowing which window applies to your situation up front avoids the year-end discoveries that the election you thought was in place actually isn't. Window 1 applies when you want S-Corp treatment in the year the entity was formed. The deadline is 75 days from the entity's formation date or the date the entity began operating, whichever is earlier. An LLC formed on January 15th has until April 1st to file Form 2553 if it wants S-Corp treatment retroactive to formation. Way past day 75 and the election can't take effect for the formation year. It pushes to the following tax year. This window catches coaches who form an LLC in January expecting to elect S-Corp later in the year and discover at year end that the window closed in April. Window 2 applies when the entity already exists and you want S-Corp treatment for the upcoming tax year. The deadline is March 15th of the tax year for which the election should be effective. An LLC that wants S-Corp treatment for the 2026 calendar year has to file Form 2553 by March 15th, 2026. That date is also the due date for the S-Corp return itself, which creates a clean concurrency. The election and the first return both ride the same date. Miss March 15 of the current year and the election pushes to the following tax year, retroactive to January 1st of that year if filed in time. The third window matters because most coaches who try to elect S-Corp themselves discover the deadline after it has already passed. Revenue Procedure 2013-30 gives you a recovery door, but it costs documentation effort and CPA hours. The two-condition test, intended to be an S-Corp from formation and the missed filing wasn't willful, has to be supported by behavior in the books, not by an after-the-fact declaration. If your bookkeeping for the year already treats the entity as a default LLC and pays distributions like a sole proprietor, the reasonable cost story gets harder to tell. Bring this one to your CPA the same week you realize the deadline slipped. What operationally changes after the election takes effect is worth knowing before you trigger it. Before election, owner's draws, no payroll service required, Schedule C tax return, CPA fees at the lower end of the range, quarterly estimated tax calculations done from net income. After election, W-2 salary plus distributions, payroll service required to handle the W-2 mechanics, Form 1120S corporate return plus K-1 issued to the owner, CPA fees in the higher range, quarterly estimated tax calculations adjusted to account for the salary withholding versus the distribution portion. Module 11.4 covers the quarterly mechanics in detail. The structural change touches the bookkeeping, the payroll process, and the tax return shape. Revoking an S-Corp election is possible, but it's not a cost-free unwind, and the restrictions matter. Revocation requires a written statement to the IRS signed by shareholders representing more than half the outstanding stock. For a single-member LLC, that's just you, but the procedural requirement still has to be met. The restrictions kick in on the re-election side. There's a 5-year re-election restriction. Once you revoke an S-Corp election, you generally can't elect again for the same entity for 5 years without IRS consent. That window is long enough that revocation has to be treated as a substantive decision, not a quick fix to a year where the math went the wrong way. A directed example walks the timing through a real-looking founding scenario. A coach forms an LLC on March 3rd with projected first-year revenue that makes the S-Corp math work according to the Unit 4.10.1 calculator. The CPA confirms election from formation is the right call. Form 2553 is prepared and filed on May 15th. That's day 73 from the March 3 formation date, comfortably inside the 75-day window. The LLC is treated as an S-Corp from day 1 of operations. Payroll service is set up the same week. First W-2 salary payment is issued in April under the new structure. The election is in effect for the full tax year because the window was met. 2 deadlines belong on your calendar for any LLC where S-Corp election is on the table, and a closing note covers what to do if a window has already passed. March 15th, the annual deadline to either elect S-Corp for the current tax year or confirm the existing election remains in place. For a new entity, formation date plus 75 days. That second date varies with each new entity, but the structural deadline is consistent. Add both to your annual maintenance calendar with 2-week prior reminders. Missing March 15th in particular is the most common election timing failure because the date is in the middle of tax season when everyone is heads down on prior year work and the next year election timing slips off the radar. Already missed a window? Bring the situation to your CPA, the revenue procedure. 2013 30 path exists for that case but isn't a self-service process, and the reasonable cost statement has specific required elements the IRS evaluates the relief request on.